So welcome to the Graveyard Shift, and thank you for attending. I appreciate it's 4 o'clock after a very long day of actually interacting with humans, which is probably quite novel for most of us. So this session is about managing access with Azure AD entitlements. So first up, a bit about me. So I'm a modern work architect at Microsoft. I work in the Microsoft Technology Center. I also run the M365 Security and Compliance User Group with Pete Rising and Rue Campbell. We're online on the last Wednesday of every month. We intend to stay online as well because we've got speakers from all over the world and attendees from all over the world as well. I'm also the hat of Grey Hat Beard, which is a pretty much weekly podcast, just talking about whatever's happening in Microsoft 365 and the wider Microsoft ecosystem. And I also run the London Power Platform User Group as well. So please feel free to reach out. Happy to ask questions. And if you have questions during this, I have an awful lot of slides to get through. So we'll have questions at the end if you don't mind. So probably too late to go and visit all the sponsors if you haven't been to them yet. But big thank you to all of the sponsors. Without them, this event wouldn't be happening. So hopefully you've had a chance to actually go to the expo and speak to some of them. So what is the problem? What are we here to talk about? So we're really here to talk about how do we manage permissions for people, and how do we manage permissions for staff, and in particular, how do we make it easy for people to know what permissions they should get and for people to actually approve it, and to actually say, we know what permissions people should have. So if we think about the sort of the process that we all go through, you know, when we started a new company, we have no permissions, and we have no access to anything. So first up, we need to get some access to something. But then we might actually change a role as well. So we need to kind of think about, well, what did we have? Do we still need it? And what do we need for our new role? And then when we leave the company, we need to make sure that we're actually revoking those permissions and tidying everything up at the end. So that transition through jobs, a lot of organizations have a lot of churn with people not necessarily joining and leaving the organization, but actually moving between roles within the organization. So when we think about, as we move between jobs, we need to think about, well, what are the permissions that we actually need, and what do we actually need to give to people to enable them to do their job? So if you think about the scenario of Joanna. Joanna has joined the organization, she's joined in one role, and we've given her permissions to do her job. She then moves to a different role in a different department. And so what do? We kind of go, okay, we need to give her some different permissions. She has access to maybe some different teams, some different applications. And then we have Fred join that new team. So then what do? Usually, oh, Fred's just joined, can you give him the same permissions that Joanna has? And Joanna has permissions from her previous role, so all of a sudden Fred has those permissions as well. So we really need to think about actually what permissions do people need in their role based on, you know, maybe their location, their role, the projects they're working on, and how long do they need them for? You know, how do we make sure that we're actually removing them when they're no longer needed? And who knows that? Who actually can you ask? Because IT, let's face it, IT are not the people to go and ask, okay, Chirag's joined, what permissions does he need? IT don't know that. So we need to have somebody in the business who knows what permissions people need in order to do the job that they've been hired to do. So we have a few tools that enable us to do this. So I guess the first part, you know, if we take the whole story around this, you know, we need to do that. How do we create a user? You know, so ideally we want to be using, you know, a user provisioning in AD, which is coming, it's quite a new thing, where you can use an HR system to actually create the user in the first place. Once we've got that identity, we want to categorize it. So how do we then say, okay, Al's joined, he's working in IT, or he's working in finance, or HR. You know, what attributes can we use, ideally coming from that HR system, to give us some top-level attributes that we can use to categorize people? Because then we can start to say, okay, based on those categorizations, we can allocate permissions and licenses and things. And then we really need to think about external people as well. So, if I'm an organization and I have a partner coming in to help me develop something, to work on a project, we need those external people in. And let's face it, me as my organization, I don't know who that partner is going to choose to work on my project, so I really don't know who should be having the access to these permissions. So we want to be able to have the external identity. We want to be able to say we can bring those in. We can offload the authentication and some of the approval process, and then we just got what do they need in our system. So when we think about those dynamic groups, they are primarily how do we assign permissions? How do we assign licenses? And those permissions, SharePoint sites, Microsoft Teams, applications, there's going to be a whole bunch of those that we want to assign permissions to. Sometimes that's quite complex if you've just got one group and you want to assign everything, and maybe there's different roles, so owner and member. So we need to think about what level of permissions we're allocating there. And then we can put access reviews in. So access reviews allow us to review based on an application or a team or a site, review the access that people have and ask somebody to recertify that that person still needs that access. And then if we don't get a response, we can revoke the access. So it gives us that ability to say, yeah, we've got a team, we have guest users, well actually, we want to check every month, do those guest users still need access, and automatically revoke it if we don't get that. And for access reviews, we have the option of actually setting up a policy that says, for every team in the organization that has external users, we want to set up an access review that asks the team owner to say, yes, these external users still need access. Which if you think about the sprawl of, well, we've invited somebody in, we've not necessarily removed them because we don't know whether we should, it gets rid of that problem. And then, the key thing that we're going to talk about today, entitlements. So entitlements take the concept of permissions and say, okay, let's build a catalog and say we've got a whole set of sites, teams, applications, and we're then going to build a bunch of access packages that we can actually say, we're going to give each of you a different access package that will give you particular permissions to each of those assets in that catalog. But then we can have a process. I can request it myself. Somebody can approve it, and then it can automatically be revoked. So access packages within the entitlements allow us to do all of that. They also allow us to manage external users and publish them to external users. So we can say, I've got a project, I know I've got partner over here, I can publish a set of permissions to that partner and allow them to request permissions to my assets in this catalog. So we've got a bunch of different building blocks in here. So on the left-hand side, we have resources. It is the left-hand, yes, it is the left-hand side. On the left-hand side, we've got resources. So these are all the sites, the teams, the applications that we want to have in our catalog. We're not really thinking about the actual permissions yet. We're just thinking what's in there. So we take those, we put them into our catalog, and then we can create an access package. We can create multiple access packages, actually. And an access package would say, we've got this set of assets, so it might be all of the sites, all of the teams, but we're going to set the role as well. So we might say we've got an admin role for our project who is going to have the owner permissions on all of our teams, and then we've got a member who's going to have member on all of our teams, so we can control the permissions. And if your applications are being authenticated through Azure AD, then you can give the roles within your applications as well. So you can be really quite granular in each of your access packages, and then you can have multiple policies. So you can have one for external, one for internal, with different approval processes in there. So it gives us a lot of flexibility to say, how do we want to manage these assets and allocate permissions as a group, rather than saying, oh, individually we've got to go through each of those applications. So, as an admin, I would create a catalog of resources. I would create access packages with combinations of them, and then I would publish them to allow users to see them. And then the users would come along, and they would browse the available entitlements, they would request them, and then it would go through the approval process. And then they would have those packages. And then the access reviews, if you put those in, they would kick in as well. So that's the overall sort of concept of what we're trying to do here. So this demo has a lot of different personas. So it's a click-through demo rather than trusting to loads of things loading up and a multitude of different browsers. So let's go through this. So creating a catalog. So when we go into Azure Active Directory, we have catalogs here. So this is in the identity governance area, and we have catalogs. So if we go into catalogs, what we can see in here is a list of all the catalogs. So remember, these are all of the sets of resources that we're grouping together to be able to actually allocate them. And in here, if we create a new catalog, we get the pop-up over on the right-hand side. So we give it a name, we give it a description, and then we've got a couple of things in there enabled. Can people actually use it, or is it just sort of in preparation? And then key to that, the next part there is it enabled for external users? So if we don't enable it for external users, we can't create an access package that will publish it. So we can have just internal packages where we just can't publish it externally. So the next step that we go through is we see the catalog, and what we can see at the top there is that blue bar going across saying add resources. We can also click in to add resources, and what we see here is 3 tabs: groups and teams, applications, and SharePoint sites. If I go into groups and teams, then what I'm going to see is basically all of the groups, and Microsoft 365 groups in a tenant. I can search them, I can select some, and then I can add them in, and they start to show up. So I start to see, well, I've actually got a group team, and it shows under the type. If I go into applications, then I'll see all the applications that are in Azure Active Directory. So sometimes you'll see actually there's no applications selected, and so a good example of this is if you've heard of Workplace Analytics. It's a Microsoft application, but it's got really, really sensitive data. But it's not actually classified as an enterprise application, so it doesn't show up. So if you have custom applications that you've built, you can actually flip over into Azure Active Directory, go to Enterprise Applications, and then you can change the filters so it's just the enabled ones. And then you can find, so Workplace Analytics there, for example, and you can get that GUID out. And so it's not necessarily the most elegant way, but it does mean that if you've got custom applications, you can pull those out, and you can then go back and add those in, search for the GUID, and you'll find the application, and you can add that in. Once you've got your applications, so we can then do the same thing with SharePoint sites. If you are multinational and you've got different geolocations, then you've got the environment at the top so you can choose where they are. And then you've got the sites that you might choose to put in there. So once we've done that, we've got our catalog. We've got the assets that we want to have in our catalog, and we add those in, and that's our catalog done. So the next thing that we then need to do is to look at the access packages. So our catalog is pretty much useless because we haven't allocated any access packages. So the next step, create an access package. So when we go into the access packages and we look at them, it'll say that there's no access packages. We go to the new, we put in a name, we put in a description, and then when we start to go through this, we've got a choice of what do we actually want to allocate. So this is where we're starting to think about the level of permissions we want to give and what do we want to give. So if I choose the groups and teams, same interface pops up as popped up before, but actually what we're seeing there is we're only seeing the assets that are in the catalog by default. Now I can add other things in, but I'd recommend that you manage it within your catalog. And then when you go through that, so if you do set the see all groups, then it will come up with everything. But if you do select that, put it in, what you'll get is it'll come in as a row in there, but then you'll have that role at the end, so you can choose, and it will pull out the appropriate role. So here we're looking at groups and teams, member, owner. If we choose owner, that's great. If we selecting applications to add in, so we check our workplace analytics. So again, you see you've got the permissions that are coming through from the Azure AD authentication, and you can choose exactly what role you want to have in there. So we can choose administrator for this one. And then if we do SharePoint, we can do that as well. So we've got SharePoint site in there. And then SharePoint site, add that in. Oh, sorry, that other one's, go back. So actually, one thing that you can see there is that if you've got multiple roles in an application that you want to give, you can actually add it in twice. So we've got workplace analytics in there with both the administrator and the analyst roles in there. So we can add two roles, multiple roles in as part of this access package. And again, coming back to the SharePoint site, we now have the roles that you would expect from a SharePoint site. So we can see that those are appropriate. So we'll choose one of those, and then we're on to the requests. So we've chosen the permissions that we want. We're now looking at the way that people actually request these. So we've got some options there. We've got users in our directory. We can see because we set this isn't enabled for external, we can see that we don't have the option to do the external, but we also have none, administrators, direct assignments. So if you think about IT, for example, you may want to manually allocate those and not have that self-service process there. For users in my directory, I can choose specific users and groups. So again, if you've got dynamic groups and you've got one for HR, you can publish this to HR and people can then self-serve. You can have all members excluding guests, or you can have all users including guests. If I go through and do just this one, and we'll say, okay, we want to have an approval process in here as well, what we then get is a couple of questions. So we've said we want approval. Do we want a justification in the approval? And then we've got this how many stages. So where we've got how many stages, I'm going to say 2. I like 2 because it gives me quite a lot of flexibility. So it means that in my first approver, I can have the manager. So this is an internal user. We're using Azure Active Directory. Who's their manager? They can be the first level of approval. Excellent. You've joined the HR team. You're going to get your line manager to approve. We do put in a fallback in case there isn't a manager in AD, because we know Active Directory is perfect, and we always have managers in there, but occasionally, you might not. Scrolling down a bit, as we go through this, what we've got is so we've got the manager, our fallback goes in there, so we've got that. What we then have is, how long do we want it to be available? 14 days, require approver justification. If no action taken, forward to an alternate approver. So we're giving a period of time for somebody to respond to this request. If they don't, can we send it on, or do we just cancel the request? So we can forward it on if we want to. Where we've got the second approver, we tend to choose specific approvers. So again, if you've got something like a project, you might have the project manager being the second approver, but the line manager being the first. So you've got those levels of approval in there. And then at the bottom, we want to enable it. And that basically allows it to be published to those users. So the next thing that we can do, and this screenshot is slightly out of date now. Of course it is. It's Microsoft, isn't it? Every time you do a demo, something's out of date. So what you can do in here is you can ask custom questions. So if you think about the approvers, maybe there's information they need to know to help them make the call on should this person have access or not. So this is where we can actually add questions in. We can add multiple choice text. If we add multiple choice, it does do the translation, so it has the language and the localized text. Personally, I find this a little cumbersome because it does force you to actually put in both the answer and all of the customizations for language as well. But you can put a lot in there. It's really helpful when you want to use that to make the choices. Now, the one thing that is missing from this, and it's in public preview at the moment, is the ability to say if you've got users, you can actually update Azure AD attributes. So based on their answers to these questions, you could actually put stuff into Azure AD, which if you think about it, that could then trigger those dynamic groups as well. So there's a few things that you can do here that are in preview at the moment. You then go through into, okay, so we've got the request process, we've got the approval process. Now, how do we want to manage that in terms of, are we reviewing it, are we revoking it, how long does this last? So at the top there, we've got expiration. So how long is this going to last? It might be till the end of the year. So for academic institutions, it might be to the end of the academic year, end of the financial year, for example. At that point, all of the permissions will be revoked because the access package expires. So we've got that option in there. Allow users to extend access. So, you could have that as an auditable, yes, I'm just extending my own access. Require approval to grant extension. So you can carry on approving this and say, okay, we're going to go through this approval process every time the access package expires, and just allow them to carry on extending. And then we get to these access review parts. So this is where, whilst the allocation of the entitlement might be maybe a year long, might be 3 years long, might last forever, we maybe want to keep checking every 3 months, actually, is this still required? So it's quite different. And the access review will then say, every 3 months, we want somebody to actually just say, yes, this user still needs access. So if we set access reviews on, we get the, when is it going to start? How frequently? What is the time period within which somebody needs to respond? And then with the reviewers, who needs to review? So, self-review, yes, I'm just self-certifying that I still need access. Specific reviewers or the manager. So, bunch of stuff in there that we can actually do. When we then go through to the next page, we basically have a review. Now, if there's an error, it'll show you what the error is, but basically it will validate everything, and then when we go through to create it, it will create, and it will take a little while. Create. And then we'll have our access package. And so what we can see now is that we've got in here, we've got our roles in there, and we've got our policies, so our access package is a policy. So we've got all of that set up. So now we can actually publish that, and users can actually request that. Now, the other thing that we've got, which is slightly different, is the external access package. So when we do the same thing and we go through, but we actually select this button to say enable external access, and we go through, and we're creating our access package. So it's very similar until we get to, so we've got our questions, we've then got our requests, and here we've got that option for users not in your directory. So when we select that, what we then have is slightly different questions underneath. So where you've got those questions underneath, the specific connected organizations. So we can actually connect specific domains. So where you're working with a partner, and you know it's that domain, you can publish an access package to that domain and make them a connected domain. So when you do that, it'll show you different domains that are there, and you can select them. And that will allow you to do a few extra things for the external users. So we can then say, okay, we want to use an external sponsor. So maybe we want to use the person that we've assigned to that connected domain and say they are going to be the first line of approval for anybody who needs access to our organization. So for that partner scenario, whoever's managing the engagement from their side, we can put them in there, and they will take the first level of approval. So then we can kind of go, well, wait a second, why have you done that? Why have you approved this person coming in? You should know who's working on our project on your side. So External sponsor, internal sponsor, it just gives us that flexibility. So we can say our access package, external, how are we going to approve it? So, all good, but now we really do need to request access, don't we? So, when we come into, I should have another slide in here just to show you where it is. So where you've got the access packages, there's a link to say, to get you to this area of my access. It's underused. It's not used by very, very many organizations, but essentially it's a dedicated site that is available both internally and externally. And what it allows you to do is to say, here are all the access packages that have been published to me. And it will be organization by organization. So you would publish the URL to your partner. They would then be able to go in and see all the access packages you've published to them. So where we see this, we've got several access packages that are available to me. If I expand it out, I can see exactly what permissions it's going to give me. So it's got groups and teams, SharePoint sites, and apps. And if I click on the plus, then that's basically me applying for it. I have to say this interface isn't the sexiest interface, and it's not the most intuitive, but does have quite a lot of useful stuff in here. So we see our package. We can see the questions that we've asked. So we've got that in there. We can put a business justification. So we asked for that. You know, why do you need access? Usually people just put in, I need access. So yeah, how useful that is not necessarily, it's not always used. We can ask for a specific period. That'll put an automatic sort of end to the access package. So when we do that and we go through and we say, we want a specific period, we put the dates in, we do submit, and basically we'll get a little toast come up to say, yes, you've requested that. If I select the View button, then I'll see the history and I'll see the status. So I can see actually, you know, if there's multiple approval steps, has it been approved? So I can chase up with my line manager maybe and go, look, I've requested this. You know, have you checked it? Have you had the request, etc. So when that comes through, we'll see on the other end, we can see requests. So we can see that in this case, Zach has requested it. We've given that policy a name, self-serve request, so we know where it's come from. So we can track and see all of that from an admin perspective and see all of these requests. Now, if I'm the line manager, then I might be going into that same portal that Zach went into to request this, but I'll be going into the approvals, and I'll be going in, so I'll get an email that will notify me. It will take me into this site, and I can see that, and if I click on the approvals, I can see all of them there, and then I can actually have a look at that request. I can see the due date, so where we put that duration, how long is it going to last, I can see that there. I can see all the request details, so I can see the answers to the questions, I can see the dates, etc. And then I can actually go through and see the history as well. And I've got those little approve, deny buttons over the top of the request as well. So I can come in, I can see that, I can put a reason in there. I hired Zach, great, it's really useful. And then I can click on approve. So it's really quite easy for approvers to actually come through and approve this. When I go through that back as Zach, yeah, I'm looking at this and I can see the history. So again, I can see that I've got approved, my request history, I can see who's approved it. So I can see that information coming through. So it's quite transparent for me as a requester to actually have this information visible. The email that would come through, approval, deny request, so that would come through. It's got the information in there. Click, go into the site. Quite easy for us to do. So this is the second level approval. Going into that again, that view details button. I can see the history. I can see the details, and then I can again go through and approve it. And then all of the history is visible, so coming back in as Zach, see all of that history, and then at the bottom there it says access delivered. So that's when it's actually finished provisioning. And if you actually use this and you're a user, and you're provisioning teams, they literally just appear in the Teams interface once you've got access. So, another thing that's quite new in this is separation of duties. So this is where, if you think about, you might have in your organization, I don't want people who have a certain set of permissions, maybe in HR, to be able to do something in finance. So in this case, what we can actually do is we can choose this separation of duties, and we can actually choose, okay, for an access package, which ones can you not have if you've already got one? So choosing an access package and say you can't have any of these other ones. When they then apply for it, they get a message because they've already got an access package granted to them, and it will say, well, wait a second, you can't actually have this one now because you've already got this other one. So it's a really useful way to actually think about that separation of responsibilities and to make sure you're keeping those roles separate. So Joanna, when she's moved from the one area of the organization maybe into a different area, potentially when she's gone to request that second access package for the new role, it's gone, wait a second, you still have that one over there. You can't get that new role. So yeah, highlight that. So the configuration and auditing. So when we're in here and we're looking at the life cycle of external users, there's a few things that we want in here. So just when we're setting up our configuration around identity governance and we go to the settings, we've got options here, block external user from signing in. Some of these we want to really make sure that actually, what do we do at the end of the life cycle? So this is one thing where the access reviews, they're great because they know the team and they'll remove permissions to that team, but they're only removing the permissions to the team, whereas this can actually then remove access to the tenant because it knows that there are no other permissions allocated. So the last permission that's removed will remove access to the whole tenant, which keeps, I'm sure if you've gone through Active Directory and looked, right, all the guest users, yes, there's an awful lot of them and nobody actually knows who they are or whether they still need access. The other element that we have is audit logging. So we do have a whole lot of audit logging that's actually set up, but we can actually set up workbooks to actually get all of that auditing in and actually analyze it as well. So we can see all of the activity when I've requested it, when I've approved it, when the permissions have been granted, the access reviews, that whole life cycle can be managed in one place. So benefits. So what are the benefits? Oh, I've got 2 slides for benefits. Oh, that's good. There must be lots of benefits then. So I guess before we get really into the benefits is what is the licensing? There's always the question, isn't it? And anything that's really useful, you probably already know that you need additional licensing for. That's just the way it works. So we do need Azure ADP 2. So it is just that Azure ADP 2, but we need that for all of the people who participate in this process. So if I am requesting, if I am approving, then I need to actually be licensed. The guest users, they don't actually need to have that license assigned to them, but you need enough internal users to match those guest users. So we need those users actually licensed properly. So the real benefit, this is reduced effort. It is really delegating out to the organization to say, you can approve this, you can request these access packages, and if you want to, you can actually allocate ownership of those catalogs to the business as well. So you can actually say, okay, HR, we're going to allocate you ownership of this catalog. If you create a new team that you need in HR, you can add it into the catalog, and if your users don't have access to it, it's up to you to put it in and then update those access packages. So we can actually delegate all of that out. So we're really trying to kind of remove the bottleneck of IT whilst keeping much more governance around the whole life cycle of the users and the permissions. Now, the future of this, so Microsoft recently, I say recently, it's getting older and older. I can't use recently for much longer, I don't think. back in July, they acquired CloudKnox Security. And CloudKnox are basically trying to build a cloud infrastructure entitlement management so that it doesn't just sit in the Office 365, Microsoft 365 space. So we think about we've got the SharePoint sites, we've got the Teams, we've got the applications. This could be building out even further into other clouds as well. So for most organizations where they may have a little bit of AWS, Salesforce, all of these things, if those aren't all going through Azure AD, then you will be able to manage it. So the future will be a cloud infrastructure entitlement management. Another EM, CM, yeah. So that's going to be the future. Not sure when that will be, but this whole entitlement management piece is certainly something that Microsoft are investing very heavily in. So just a quick reminder, the key concepts. As an admin, we've got that catalog, all of the resources together. We then create access packages to allow people to request access. As a user, I can actually browse those, whether I'm an internal or external user. If they've been published to me, I can browse those. I can request an access package. As a manager, I can approve access. The user gets access. And as a manager, I would be reviewing that access and revoking it at the end. So it gives control over all of those permissions. And with that, any questions? Yep.
Where does it carry on the chain? So if you've given somebody an entitlement and you go make a change to it, does that roll out immediately for that user that's already got it? And also, are you able to then take it away from the sort of child applications? For example, if someone added to a team via an entitlement through the Teams interface, could you take it away from them?
So you wouldn't necessarily take it away from them through the entitlements. What you would be doing is to be saying the owners, it would be a private team usually, and the owners would know that they shouldn't be allocating those permissions out, so adding users in. If you change the catalog and you add a new team in, then yes, if you add it to the access package, then it will roll out. You can also allocate. So based on existing users, you don't have to force them to go through and request all of these. You can actually allocate those directly as well and bypass the approval. So when you're getting started, you can kind of say, okay, I know my HR department are going to need it. I know who's in it today. Allocate all of that, bypass the approval. But then any access reviews, the expiration, that will all kick in after that. Any question? So usually 1 to 5. So internal 1, external 5, but there is the monthly active users as well of 50,000 for guest users coming in and basically saying you've got, if you've got P2, you've got a lot of users that you can have to start with. It really depends on the volume of external users that you're bringing in. I've never seen any organization kind of come up against a boundary on that one. And it's basically just there to prevent, having the tenant with one user and everybody being a guest user and you're not actually paying anything, Any other questions? Excellent. Well, in that case, for the last time today, if you could provide feedback, always welcome. Please feel free to reach out to me if you've got any questions about it. So, thank you. Thank you very much.